Well, we're doing this series called Conversations with Jesus, and we've been looking at these individual personal conversations that Jesus had with people, and we've been asking a series of questions. How did Jesus talk to the individual person? You know, what truths did he include? And then, is this person me? And what I've been saying is that we've got 9 of these, right? 9 or 10 of these, I don't remember. 9 or 10 of these. And at some point along the way, you're going to find yourself in one of these conversations, maybe multiple, maybe one week you're like, wow, yeah, that's something that I'm wrestling with, or I have an issue with, or another week you're like, wow, that is too. I didn't know I was like 3 people, you know, all these different things in little bits. At some point, I'm sure you're going to find yourself somewhere in these. And so, since we're on the second half of this, I thought we would review very quickly. Who have we seen so far? We started with Nicodemus. He was a theologian, Jewish scholar, knew everything there was to know about the Jewish law, but he was still curious about Jesus. And he needed to face the simple truth. And at first, he couldn't wrap his mind around it. Theologians have that problem sometimes with simple truths, right? It gets so deep sometimes that we miss the simple stuff. And Jesus was like, no, I don't want to go off on all these tangents. We've got to focus on the simple things. And Nicodemus finally did understand, finally did come around, and he becomes one of Jesus' supporters later on in the Gospel of John. We looked at the woman from Samaria, where from a societal standpoint, she was an outcast. And in her case, she wanted to skirt around, and not because she was a theologian, but there was something in her life that she needed to face. And Jesus allowed her a little bit of leeway and then said, now let's face the sin in your life. And it wasn't because he wanted to humiliate her. He didn't do this in front of a lot of people. He just said, there's something that you need to address if we're going to move forward. And so he did that with her. Then we looked at another woman in chapter 8 of John. And in this case, she was a pawn in somebody else's game. Remember, they dragged, the religious leaders dragged this woman to Jesus. She was caught in the very act of adultery. Well, a little bit of, respect or something toward this woman, right? And she was being played basically by the religious leaders in order to get to Jesus. She had really nothing to do with this, and they were using her, humiliating her, unlike Jesus did when he called out the sin of the woman in Samaria. The religious leaders put it front and center in front of all of the people. Jesus was in the temple. They didn't care who was looking on. And she was completely at Jesus' mercy. And he did show her mercy, didn't he? A lot of grace and a lot of mercy. And he used that not to beat up on her, but to actually show a lot of grace and mercy. And he actually pointed out the sin of the religious leaders, not the woman. It was really cool. In John chapter 9, we saw the blind man. He was overlooked by society. People had walked past him for, who knows how long he had been blind. They threw him some money, but they really didn't care about him, to the point that on the same day that he went from blind to seeing, they didn't recognize him anymore because he shouldn't be up walking around seeing. That's how overlooked he was. Are you sure that you have been blind your whole life? Yes, I'm sure. Talk to his parents. Are you sure this is your son? We've known him since he was born, right? We know this is our son. Just because you don't recognize him doesn't mean that, right? And so he was overlooked by society, and yet he believed the simple, pure gospel. And again, John chapter 9, one of my favorite verses in the whole Bible, and in fact, we sang it this morning. I don't know about all this other stuff, but here's one thing I know. I used to be blind, but now I see. It's like, oh yeah. That's one of those comebacks that you think about later, usually, right? You're in a conversation and you want one of those punchlines, and it's like you're 10 minutes down the road. Oh, I should have said, he got to say it. I'm really happy for him. I once was blind, but now I see, and the rest of it doesn't matter. You can argue about all the other stuff you want, but this is what happened in my life. This is what Jesus did for me. What a testimony. Awesome testimony. And then last week, we looked at the lawyer, or the expert in religious law, and he was a religious leader, and this was the story of the Good Samaritan that Jesus used as an illustration to point out where this guy needed to go in his life. And in his case, he had all the answers, but he was living without love, right? He was living without love. He's like, who is my neighbor? Who is close enough that I have to treat them nicely? How big of a circle do I have to have, really, Jesus? And Jesus said, it's not about how big of a circle do you have to have. The question is, whose neighbor will you be? Who are you going to get close to? And Luke chapter 10 says that he was trying to justify his own lack of hospitality, his own lack of love, when he said, well, who really is my neighbor anyway, you know? And Jesus said, which one of these three, this was our key verse last week, which one of these three became a neighbor? The question is not, will you be my neighbor? The question is, will you be a neighbor? And we saw that last week in Luke chapter 10. This week, we're going to stay in Luke chapter 10 for a few verses and then also jump to John chapter 11. Two conversations that Jesus had with the same woman that carry a very similar theme. Okay? The lady's name is Martha, and we don't have anything for her yet because that's where we are. So Luke chapter 10, and we're going to look at the last few verses, starting with verse 38. Down to 42. This may be something that a passage you're very familiar with. If you are, you might be interested in I'm going to put a little bit of a different spin on it today, and so you might find this interesting. You might find it heretical, and you leave. That's fine too. But you might find this really interesting because of there's something in here. Most of the time I've heard this passage taught goes on a very specific tract, and I want to go off of that tract a little bit. I want to bring a different idea, and maybe you've heard it before, and that's fine. So, Luke chapter 10, verse 38. Now, as they went on their way, this is Jesus and his disciples. This is it's possible that it's immediately following the story before it with the lawyer and the Good Samaritan. It doesn't have to be. Jesus entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him as a guest. Literally, she received him into her home as a guest. She had a sister named Mary. And let's just pause there for a second because this story goes very quickly, okay? So let's set the scene. The scene is we have Jesus and his disciples, so at least 13. We don't know how many people are following them. They go to a certain village. Luke doesn't even give the name of the village. We find out later in other places it's named Bethany, and it's outside of the city of Jerusalem a little ways. And this home seemed to be a favorite stopping point for Jesus. He was good friends with Mary and Martha here. They have a brother named Lazarus. We don't know anything about their if they had marriages or families. We don't know about their parents. We don't know anything about them except there are these three siblings that lived either in the same house or at least in proximity to each other, and they all were sort of like a little compound there or something. So we've got Martha. It says welcomed him. She probably was the older sister, I'm guessing. Maybe she was the one who sort of ran the house. And then Mary seems to be younger. And then Lazarus is just in there somewhere. And we don't know where, okay? So that's the scene. This is a favorite place where Jesus loves to hang out. And in fact, during Passion Week, as Jesus, after the triumphal entry, he goes into Jerusalem. Every day he spends in Jerusalem in the temple teaching, and every night he withdraws to Bethany. And I'm guessing it was their home. Okay, it was a safe place for him. His headquarters in the north were in Capernaum, where he had family and he had friends, and I think this probably was his headquarters in the south of Israel. This was not just an Airbnb that he stopped at. This was a place where he liked, that he was welcome. It was a safe place for him to be. They were friends. And we have Martha here. She welcomed him as a guest in her home, and she had this sister named Mary. Now, that's the setting. Let's look at what happened in this event. She had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he said. Now, I don't normally do this just because of there is a word in the original text. There is a word in most of our English translations. It just says who sat, okay? But in the original text, in the Greek text, there is the word also right there. Most of our translations don't bring it across. And in fact, as I was reading other writers this week, several of the commentaries said, we're not sure what to do with this word also. We're not sure why it's there. And I'm like, well, if you read it, it seems to me that it fits really well when you look at it in context, because she had a sister named Mary, and I'm going to put the word also in here, who also sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he said. If the word were in there, let's just pretend, if the word also was there, what does that tell us? Okay, there were other people. Who specifically? Martha. Okay? And this is a big deal to me, because the very next line says, Martha was distracted with all the preparations she had to make. What does distracted tell you?
She was doing something else that she should have been doing.
Okay, doing something else that she should have been doing. All right, what else? She wasn't listening.
Maybe she was up and down.
Busy? Is that what you were going to say too? The up and down. I think that's where it is. There's a particular... Yeah. Well, see, and this is perfect. We're going into Thanksgiving season. Let's set this up, right? Okay. The particular tense of this verb is sort of an ongoing, this continuous distraction. Okay. Now, a lot of times, and maybe you've heard this before, if you've heard this story, the way I've heard it many times just over the years is that she was sort of in the kitchen doing her thing, and Mary was sitting at the feet of Jesus doing her thing, and they were completely separate the whole time, right? And then she gets frustrated, as we'll see in the thing, right? In the story, right? That's how it's sort of come across to me. That's how it's always been in my mind. But as I was working on it this week, and I'm not the only one, I saw a lot of other people say the same thing, but she was continually being distracted. Now, if she's always in the kitchen, always working on lunch, always doing something, that's not a distraction, is it? That's just what she's doing. If we take that word also, which is in the text, even if you don't know what to do with it, if you take and put that word also, she had a sister named Mary who also sat at the Lord's feet, but Martha was being distracted with the preparations. Doesn't that sound an awful lot like she's up and down, right? She wants to be in there, she wants to listen, and maybe she comes in and listens for a second, and then she has to go back in and check on something. What's going to happen in a couple of weeks on Thanksgiving? What are you going to do?
Burn the turkey.
Okay, yes, yeah, we're going to burn the turkey, right? Okay, that's probably true. If you are, so like I spend a lot of time in the kitchen on Thanksgiving, okay? Because it gets me away from people, and it's wonderful, and I don't have a problem with being distracted because I'm not playing the games anyway. But some of you actually like your family getting together and all of that, right? And so you go into the living room or in the parade is on, right? And you want to watch the parade, or you want to watch the game, or there's a family game, going around the table, and you've been even not at Thanksgiving, you've been at this before, right? You're playing a family game around the table, or the game system or whatever, and there's a certain person, maybe it's you, maybe it's somebody else in the family, there's a certain person that after their turn, whether it's a card, whether it's moving around the board, whether it's playing on the console, right? After their turn, what do? They disappear back into the kitchen, and then you have to yell, "It's your turn," right? Right? There's somebody, every get together, every family, there's always somebody. Sometimes it's the same person, maybe it's you, maybe it's not. It's your turn. Why? Because they are being distracted. I think that's what's going on here. Okay? I think that's what's going on here. Mary and Martha, probably Lazarus, other people, they're sitting around, they're listening to Jesus. Who wouldn't, right? But every couple of minutes, Martha jumps up because she has to check something. The timer goes off. She has to flip something. She has to turn something, this whole thing. And she's in and out and back and forth. And as she wants to listen, as she wants to learn, as she wants to be a part of what's going on, she's continually being distracted by the other things that are going on elsewhere in the house. Okay, specifically with the preparations that she had to make because she welcomed them into her house. Okay? And I think she gets a bad rap more than she deserves in this passage. She's being hospitable. Seriously, how many people are coming over for Thanksgiving? Or you have 13 people coming over into your house? Okay? She did. And it wasn't just 13 people. This is 13 grown men, plus possibly more, who always followed them. Well, I don't know. Apparently there was enough room that, maybe a courtyard, depending on the time of year when this happened. A lot of the houses in Israel at that time had a flat roof with a little parapet or, whatever, not a parapet, but like a rail or whatever, right? And it was flat, and sometimes it was shaded, and sometimes it wasn't, so that you could host, because it did get hot inside, so they were able to sit on top, sort of like a patio or a porch, but it was on the roof. And so it's possible that they were sitting up on the roof or out in the courtyard, and she had to keep going in and out or up and down the stairs, and you're always checking on something, okay? And she was distracted with all these preparations. And so she came up to him, and this is really interesting because it says that she barged in. Now, if Jesus is teaching, are you going to barge in and interrupt him? No. No, probably not. We don't do that with, if you've got a special guest in your home or whatever, you try to be very careful, and it's like, try to wait for that break in the conversation. Would you like a refill? Could I get you something, right? Here, the verse, she sort of barged in, she stood there, and she asked the question in a certain way that assumed a positive response. Here's how she said it. She said, "You care that my sister has left me alone to do all the work, don't you?" Okay? In Greek, you can ask a question in a certain way that it assumes a positive response or assumes a negative response. Okay, and we do that in English by putting the words right. So we're gonna take "don't you" and put it at the end. "Lord, you care that my sister has left me alone to do all the work alone, don't you?" She expected him to say, "Yes, Mary, go do your job." That's what Martha was expecting. And notice, she has left me to do all the work alone. It seems that probably what happened is that they were serving and they were getting all the preparations made, and they were both popping in and out. And at some point, Mary just sort of hung there and listened and kept listening. The verb tenses all the way through here are these continuous, kept listening, and then finally just sat down. As Martha's still, standing in the doorway, listening for the timer, and she keeps running in and out, Mary just sort of gets sucked in and finally just sits down. And that caused Martha frustration. And so she barges in on Jesus, of all people, right? "Lord, do you even see what's going on here? She's supposed to be helping me, and she sat down, and you agree that she should be helping me, right? Tell her to come help me." familiar with, or you know that phrase, familiarity breeds contempt? Right? There is a danger, I'm going to make a principle here. There is a danger in Christianity that we become so familiar with the faith, so familiar with Christianity, so familiar with Jesus, so familiar with God, so familiar with the Bible, so familiar with all of the stuff that we forget how special it is. We forget how important it is. We forget how unique it is compared to everything else. She had Jesus in her house teaching. And she burst in and said, "Tell her to help me." Now, if that doesn't cause you to, sort of take a step back or something, there's something wrong here. There is a danger for those of us who have been saved for a long time to forget just how awesome and special salvation really is. This is why we need to be reminded of the gospel regularly. This is why in 2 Peter chapter 1, we see this verse. It's at the end of the path. We look at this every once in a while. 2 Peter 1:9, a person who does not have the steps of the path continuing and increasing in his or her life is myopic. Remember, short-sighted is blind because they've forgotten the cleansing of their past sins. This is why we have to keep the gospel in front of us. We have to keep remembering, because just like familiarity breeds contempt, we can see that she had somehow lost the specialness. It's not that she didn't love him anymore. It's not that she wasn't his friend, but she had somehow come to the point, at least in this situation, where she forgot the specialness of Jesus being right there in her home. And he became just another guy. Just another teacher, where she was able to burst in and say, "I want you to take my side. I want you to take my side against my sister. Tell her to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha." Now, I hear compassion in this voice, right? I hear compassion. You know what else I hear? I hear a little bit of a chuckle. Okay, I think Jesus had a good sense of humor, okay? I hear a little bit of a chuckle. Now, put yourself in the situation, all right? This is not the first time they've met each other, okay? They've known each other. He's been there to their house, many, many times. She has a strong personality. She has this type A. She's going to get stuff done, right? And she's trying to put all these preparations together, and I don't think Jesus was clueless. I think he saw what was going on. She kept coming in and out and listening, and he saw Mary sit down. This did not catch him off guard. And all of a sudden, Martha just stormed in and said, "Lord, you care that she's not helping me, don't you? Tell her to help me." He's like, "Martha, Martha, hold on a second. Hold on a second." I think there's a chuckle in his voice. I think he's like, whoa. Don't, and maybe I'm projecting this, so that's fine. But don't think so much that Jesus was so stoic that he never laughed, that he never found the humor in things. Okay? Yes, there was compassion. Martha, hold on. Listen to his word. Martha, you're worried and you're troubled about many things. Listen to this next slide. One thing, verse 42, one thing is needed. In the Greek text, it just says one is needed. And all the scholars and commentators are not sure, one what? It doesn't say. Luke never actually says. It just says one is needed. So what could that be? You've got your opinion is just as valid as every other commentator's out there. So one what?
One of the many things.
One of the many things that you are distracted about, or that you're worried about, rather. One of the many things, like what? What could those be? The meal, right? What else?
The fact that Mary's not helping her.
Okay, all right. The fact that Mary's not helping. Listening to him, right? Beth? She feels like she's doing all the work. She's overwhelmed, right? If you apply it to, yeah, Dale.
She's probably like that about everything
everything, right? This is her perpetual state, right? Right? Oh. She was an oldest child. That's right. She was a perfectionist. She was, So if you look at it you can look at it from either a spiritual or a physical point, a perspective, right? I like both, actually. I think it's probably both because Jesus did not specify. He just said one is needed. So from a physical standpoint, it could just be, Martha, we don't need all this one dish. Just bring the thing in here. We'll all eat out of it. It's not a big deal. You don't need to make 14 courses, okay? One is sufficient. Just let us eat and come in and sit down. But from a spiritual perspective is also, I think, legitimate as well. One focus, one emphasis, one thing has to take priority, and you're allowing yourself to be distracted from the one thing that is needed at this point. One thing is needed, one thing is necessary. And this is I think there's an important principle here. There's a time to serve, there's a time to sit and learn. Okay? Way too often, the commentaries or teachers or whatever see that, Mary is the good person here and Martha's the bad person here, right? Mary's sitting and listening and Martha's doing all this other stuff and she should have just sat and listened. If all we do is sit and listen, what ministry gets done? Nothing. Jesus did not tell Martha, I don't want to eat today, sit down. Right? Okay? He didn't say, stop all of your preparations, stop serving. He said, hold on, just one thing. There's a time to serve, there's a time to sit and listen, and part of Christian maturity and part of being on the path is learning how to balance those two. Okay, it's not about always sitting and listening. Nothing ever gets done if all we do is sit and listen. But then we never learn if all we do is serve. We can burn out. This is like trying to be on the path and jumping from faith directly to brotherly affection and unselfish love. God put those steps in the middle on purpose. Okay, He wants us to walk the path straight through. And there's a reason that there are these 4 steps in the path that continue in the loop where we are listening and we are growing and we are learning, and then our service comes out of that. And that's a continual cycle. It's not an either or. We don't want to turn this into an either or. Martha's bad and Mary's good. It's not even in here. It's not what Jesus said. He said, you're worried and you're troubled about so many other things when we can do with just one. And it's okay. In this case, Mary has chosen the best part. And yeah, I'm not going to take that away from her. Okay, Mary's chosen the best part. Right now, we can get by with one dish and just sit and listen. Just spend some time with me. I think we make Christianity harder than it's supposed to be. When I teach Matthew, the book of Matthew in Uganda every year, I spend extra time on chapter 11, verses 28 through 30, and this is in our path book too. Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest." Rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, because I am gentle, I'm humble of heart, and you will find rest for your souls, because my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Christianity that constantly weighs us down under expectations and rituals and all this stuff is not biblical Christianity. If your Christianity constantly has you running around, constantly has you doing all this stuff where it feels like your soul never gets rest, that's not biblical Christianity. And what it is, probably, is us putting way too many things on ourselves, hoping to please the Savior. Remember when I said that you're going to find yourself in one of these people? All right? This is the one that hits close to home for me so far, right? Okay? Because I so much don't want to be a failure that I'm going to keep doing more and more and more to make sure that I get it right, so that, because one day I want to hear, well done, right? You want to stand before the Savior and hear, well done, good and faithful servant. Well, I'd better make sure I do it all so that I might accidentally get something right. I don't want to be a failure. Okay? This may not be you. That's fine. This may not be you, but this is the one that I hear all the time. And this is why when I'm teaching, this is why when I teach the path, I'm teaching and preaching as much to myself or more than I am anybody else. This is why I teach this all over the world. When I go to different places, I always take the path with me, whether it's in the book form or just the teaching, because I need to hear it as much as everybody else needs to hear it. Because I think we collectively, as the Church of Jesus Christ, have turned Christianity into something that Jesus never intended it to be. And we put too much on ourselves because we think that if we do this hard enough, if we do this fast enough, if we do enough of it, then we won't fail and we'll please Him. And we forget that doing is supposed to come out of being. Christianity is first about be, and that should lead to do. But in our human lives, we spend so much time doing that we forget the being part. And that's what I see here. Martha was so busy being distracted with the doing that she could not allow herself to just sit and listen for a few minutes. And Jesus said, the other stuff is fine, but that's not what's important right now. We could be good with one. It's okay. Come sit. Come sit. Come be with me. Those aren't the words that are in here, but that's what he said, right? I think that's the meaning. That's the tone. That's the tone of what he said. Just come be with me. This is why the path has the action steps at the end. I'm not going. That's what Mary's chosen right now. And I'm not going to take that away from her. Okay? Now, there's one more conversation. We're going to keep on the same theme. So it's not like we're changing completely. So let's just keep on that same theme. And we need to go to John chapter 11. Now, the whole chapter is the story. We're not going to look at the whole chapter. There's just a couple of verses I want to see, because only a few verses are the conversation. The first 5 verses sets up the scene, and that is that Jesus is not in Bethany. He's away. He's actually hiding right now. He's in hiding with his disciples. It's very close to Passion Week. And he knows the religious leaders in Jerusalem are trying to kill him. And so he's staying outside of their jurisdiction, and he's hiding out. That's really what's going on here, so that they can't get him before it's time. And he gets the message, Martha and Mary send a message, Lazarus, the one whom you love, is sick. And if you know the story, if you know what happened, Jesus waited a few days, Lazarus died, and Jesus waited for that to happen before he went to Bethany to visit them. Okay? That's what sets up the conversation. In fact, Jesus in verse 4 said that this sickness is not going to lead to death, but to God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now, obviously it did lead to death, so Jesus must be talking about permanent, because Jesus is going to raise him from the dead. Okay, it did not end in death. It ended in a temporal resurrection. Okay, so now we need to move down all the way to verse 20. Okay, this is where we're going to pick up. We're not going to look at the whole thing. All the way down to verse 20. So Jesus finally, after Lazarus dies, he takes off. He finally gets to the place. Verse 20, when Martha heard Jesus is coming, somebody said Jesus is coming, she went out to meet him, And Mary was sitting in the house. Apparently she likes to sit. I don't know what the thing with Mary and sitting is. But it does give the personality, a little bit more personality. Who's the first one to get up and run? Is Martha, right? Who's the one to just sit there and sort of think and meditate and brood and whatever? Mary. This is their personalities. Okay? Not right or wrong, it's just who they were. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. That's funny because, and we won't get to it, but when Mary finally does talk to Jesus, she says the exact same words, like word for word. How many times over the past several days have they said that to each other, do you think? If Jesus would have just been here, Lazarus wouldn't have died. If Jesus would have just been, how many times have other people said, did he get the message? Because if he would have been here, your brother wouldn't have died. Lord, if you would have been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Which is a great statement of faith, right? It is. It's a great statement of faith. I believe you can heal him. If you would have been here, he would have been healed. Jesus healed people from a distance. He didn't have to show up, right? Okay, so on the other hand, it is both a great statement of faith, and it's she lost hope when he didn't do what she expected him to do. Do you see the thread here? Martha had her way of doing things, and she expected him to go along with what she wanted to do. Right? Is this hitting home for anybody? But even now, verse 22, even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will grant you. It may sound like she's asking him to bring Lazarus back. I don't think so, because as the conversation goes on, they get to the tomb. She's like, oh, no, you can't open it. It doesn't sound like that. So I'm not sure exactly what she's asking. Maybe in the future. I don't know. Verse 23, Jesus says, your brother will come back to life. Your brother will come to life. Literally, that's what it says. Your brother will come to life. Okay? That's it. Most translations insert the word again there because of the context. But your brother will come back to life. And Martha said, I know he'll come back to life in the resurrection at the last day. I know that, which is really cool because resurrection was not a major topic. It was not a major doctrine in Jewish theology at that time, but it was in Daniel, so they could see some of it. Not everybody believed in it. She was one person who believed in the resurrection. And she took this as, okay, yes, he's going to, rise in the... And then Jesus said in verses 25 and 26, one of the great I am statements, he said, I am the resurrection and the life. I am the resurrection and the life. It's not just that he will be, but that's I. The one who believes in me will live even if he dies. The one who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Now, listen to what he asked. To this point, she was believing in prophecy. Daniel said that there will be a resurrection at the end. Daniel chapter 12, there's a resurrection at the end. That's what she believed in. Jesus said, listen, don't just believe prophecy. Believe what? Me. Right? Don't just put your hope in prophecy. Don't just put your trust in prophecy. Here's what I need you to embrace. I don't want you to just embrace facts. It's biblical, it's scriptural, it's true. But I don't want you to live your life based just on fact that you've been told. I want you to live your life based on trust in me. Yes, there will be a resurrection. Daniel said so, but I am the resurrection and the life. Do you believe this? Not just do you believe that, but do you believe this? Do you believe me? Isn't that real similar to what was happening in Luke chapter 10? Will you be with me? You're busy with all this other stuff, but I want you to be with me. John chapter 11. I know you believe all this other stuff, but do you believe in me? Jesus continually pulled her back to himself, not just the situation, not just what was going on, but pulled her back to himself. And she said in this great statement, verse 27, she said, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, Christ and Messiah are the exact same word. The Son of God who comes into the world. He's like, what do you really believe? Do you just believe a bunch of facts? Do you believe what you've been taught? Or do you have a personal faith in me? Our faith is not in religion. It's not in tradition. Our faith is not in just what we've been taught. We believe because of what we're taught in the Scriptures, but our faith is not in the Scriptures. See the difference? Our faith is in a person. Our faith is in Christ. We have a personal relationship, not with a book, but with a person. And this is what he had to keep bringing her back to. That makes the difference. Every other religion out there, every other tradition, every other faith out there has a relationship with a set of teachings. We have a relationship with a person. That right there is what makes biblical Christianity different than anything else. It's not just a set of facts. It's not just a book. It's not just a holy book. It's not just a set of teachings. It's a relationship with a person. And in both of these cases, in Luke 10 and in John 11, Jesus said, are you embracing me as a person or just the stuff, just the situation? You've embraced me as a guest, but are you embracing me for who I really am? Are you focused on who I am or just who I am in your house right now? Are you focused on me because of who I am, because I am the resurrection and the life, or just the facts that you've been taught about resurrection? Okay? If your faith is in the facts but is not in the person, then it is going to be a dead, depressing faith. It really is. And so, how did Jesus talk to Martha? Let's wrap all this up. How did he talk to Martha? He talked to her as a friend, right? This was a friend. Martha was not like Nicodemus. Martha was not like any of the other people we've seen so far. Martha was a friend who just needed to be reminded, right? And I think this may be where you are. It's definitely where I am. A friend who just needs to be reminded sometimes of what it's really about. He talked with her as a friend. He talked with her with gentleness. He talked with compassion. And yet he pressed her to dig deep into her faith. What is it, Martha, that you really believe? Do you just believe about me, or do you believe in me? It's a great reminder, isn't it? It's a great reminder. Dig deep into your faith. What did he share? I think he shared one main truth, and that is, I am enough. I am enough. I think that's the truth that he wanted her to get. I am enough. In Luke chapter 10, in the first, it's don't let yourself be distracted away from me. It's so easy in ministry and life and family and careers and all the other stuff. Isn't it so easy to just be distracted? Okay? Don't let yourself be distracted away from Jesus. In John chapter 11, Jesus said, I am enough. I am both the giver of real life and I am life itself. Okay? I give life, but I also am life. You cannot have the life that you want, the life that God wants you to have, apart from Jesus. Not just without me you can do nothing, but apart from me you can't even be what it is that you were designed to be. Right? And finally this morning, is this you? Is this me? Do you get so focused on getting it right that you miss who you're doing it for? You get so focused on doing it right, you get so focused that you don't want to be a failure, that you forget why you're doing it in the first place, why you're doing ministry, why you're raising your family in a certain way, why you're, whatever it is. Do you get distracted? Focused on so much on the situation. Number two, so focused on the situation that you forget the Savior. It's so easy to be like Martha. And again, I think she gets a bad rap. I don't think she's a bad person. I think she desperately loves Jesus and she desperately wants to please him in the ways that she knows best. And sometimes the way that she knew best caused her to forget why she was doing it in the first place. And I know I do that, and I assume that you probably do that. And hopefully, these passages, this conversation, these two conversations with Jesus, between Jesus and Martha, is just a good reminder of why are we doing what we're doing to begin with. If we're doing it just so that we don't fail, just so that we can hear well done, just so that we can make sure that we get it right, just so that he's not disappointed in us, we've missed it. Right? We want to do what pleases him, but we want to do it for him, because of him. And that's that balance. And I know I wrestle with that, and I know some of you do too, because we've talked about it. Maybe not everybody. Some of you are sitting there like, yeah, it's not an issue for me. Good. Well, you're somebody else. Okay? You're somebody else in this list, right? You may not be Martha, but you're somebody else. But if this is you, if this is your story, I hope this has been a good reminder, seeing this conversation, where it's just, we're friends, and we just needed to be reminded of why we're doing this to begin with, right? It's not, we're not failures. Jesus knows who we are. He's the one who gave us the spiritual gifts and the equipping and all the stuff to do ministry to begin with anyway. He gave us his Holy Spirit. But what he calls us first, why don't you just come be with me? And then we can work on the other stuff as needed. Because really, we only need one. Just one thing's needed right now. Don't let your situation, don't let your circumstances, don't let your mission and your ministry and all this stuff take you away from why you're doing it to begin with.